Are we ready to roll, or are we waiting for you? We're ready to roll. Ready to roll. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming out in the cold. Tom and I were talking earlier about maybe having adventure tourism coming to Regina to experience the cold. Source of revenue, I suppose. Okay, Tom and I are going to go back and forth on this, as is kind of typical with these presentations. And as is typical, this will be available online at this website, and also your presence indicates your consent as far as content for our budget presentation. So this is what we're going to be presenting this morning. I'll look at enrollments and credit hours, the provincial fiscal situation. Tom's going to chat about the operations forecast overview. I'll have a quick overview of the process for budget submissions. Tom's going to have a few comments about the budget clawback, and then we'll wrap up and have questions following that. Okay, so a bit of good news. As of the first day of classes, our enrollment is up by 2.8%. This is wonderful news in view of demographic situation across the country, really. This typically falls by about 1% by the time classes or drop dates are finished by the end of the month. So we're expecting an around 2% increase by the time that rolls around. Interestingly enough, 30% of our enrollment is coming from out of province. 15 or about 14% is from non-Saskatchewan domestic residents, but about 14% is coming from international. So this is continuing the trend of what we've been doing for the last several years. But to have this percentage of students coming from outside the province is good news and interesting news. And I think it re-emphasizes the importance of not only the quality of service that we provide, but also our tuition levels to make sure that we aren't outpricing ourselves in the marketplace. Very competitive marketplace, as you can imagine. Perhaps more competitive as of January 20th, when you-know-who is coming into power, maybe. But nonetheless, it's a very competitive environment, so we've got to be very strategic and on our toes. And steadily increasing, our total operating budget is predicted to be 37% coming up in the next fiscal year. So that's a substantial amount of funding coming from student tuition. Where we stand now, the province, as you know, is expecting a $1 billion deficit. You also have probably heard about the discussions around transformational change. We've had, obviously, you know, we've had these discussions about transformational change within the university, and I guess we'll see how that mets out by the time the spring budget comes around. The government has focused, as we state, in health, social services, and education, so we've got to be on our toes for this. The government is committed to a balanced budget, so things are going to be happening, so we'll have to keep our eye on the budget as it comes forward. Tom.
So good morning, everybody, and again, thank you for coming. I should mention, too, Dave Button's unable to be here today because he's got a conflict, a scheduled conflict. I just wanted to take you through 3 quick slides on the operations forecast, which I'm sure everybody in the room has read in detail. All of those documents, all of the successive operations forecasts are up on that web page hosted in Brian Christie's office. The operations forecast for 17-18 was developed in the first half of 2016. That's how far back we begin work on those things. And there were consultations, of course, with the Council Committee on Budget as we developed that forecast. Essentially, the operations forecast is a document by which the university makes its official request for public funds for tax money from the government of Saskatchewan. That's the document, it's the vehicle for that official request for public funding. The board always reviews and approves the operations forecast. You see the dates then. And we did a presentation to Treasury Board on the 20th of October. Treasury Board is chaired by the Minister of Finance. The Minister of Advanced Education is there, several other ministers, elected officials, Treasury Board officials, analysts, and so on. And we take them through our operations forecast, highlighting essentially why it is we're asking for this money, what we're going to do with the money, and then answering questions that they have of us. If you, and we're not going to put it up here because the tables are quite detailed, but if you do go to the site, again, if you can't find it, just go to the university main page, type in ORP in the search box, Office of Resource Planning. You'll then see budget, and you'll then see operations forecast. You can read through it. What we did was develop some scenarios, and we were asked to develop 3 years' worth of planning scenarios for the finances of the university. Table 1 in the operations forecast shows that if we maintain our current levels of activity and spending, we would require average annual tuition increases of 3.8%. So that's 3.8% a year for another 3 years. And we've been tracking around that mark for the last 2 or 3 years. So we're beginning to be concerned about the level and rate of tuition increases at this university. But also, we would not only need the 3.8 on tuition, average tuition each of those years, we would need 3.3 in the first year on the grant, 3 in the second year on the grant, and 2.7 in year 3 on the grant, just to maintain current levels of spending at the university. On page 5, you'll see what the effects would be if we kept tuition at 3.8 each year, but we got 0 on the grant. And the board has asked us to develop alternative scenarios too, in which we do not stipulate tuition increases of 3.8, we stipulate tuition increases that are lower, of 2, 1.5, and 1, so that they can consider, in the mix of their decision making, what an appropriate level of tuition would be for the next 3 years. Now, everybody, I think, knows last year we were fortunate. We didn't get what we asked for in the grant, but the Saskatchewan University funding mechanism divides the pie in the province between the two universities according to a whole series of very complex formulae, one of which, of course, is relative growth in enrollment. This is a lag factor. You have to show that enrollment growth, and you don't get the money until several years into that pattern of enrollment growth. But essentially, we have been growing our enrollments at this university, thanks to the efforts of many people inside and outside this room, at a rate greater than the enrollment growth at the University of Saskatchewan. And last year, that showed up in the form of an additional $997,000 to the University of Regina, taken away from the University of Saskatchewan to recognize our greater enrollment growth. We're also in discussions. Brian and his team are working very hard on this with ministry officials on the funding mechanism itself. We believe there is evidence to suggest that the funding mechanism needs a re-examination. It's a fairly dated series of formulae, and we believe that it's time to have a look and ask a very simple question, really. We understand that Saskatoon has programming we do not have, and some of that programming is very expensive to deliver. Medicine, for example. The estimated cost of educating a medical student per year is now $100,000. $100,000. We accept that. The question we're asking is the funding mechanism accurately reflecting the fact that roughly 80% of the enrollments at the two campuses are in common, in disciplines in common? Arts, science, nursing, education, engineering. We can run down the list. Are we being funded adequately or fairly in those common disciplines with the University of Saskatchewan? And so we're working on that. Again, it's not a simple thing, it's a complex thing, and it's obviously something that is as important to the University of Saskatchewan and the ministry as it is to us. What we do know is that a greater percentage of the University of Saskatchewan operating budget derives from provincial funding. They get more per student than we do for a series of reasons, some good, some perhaps need to be examined, and some embedded deep in history. The bottom line is that the University of Saskatchewan is substantially less dependent than we are on tuition revenue. As you saw on the previous slide, we're projecting next year that we'll be at about 37.5% on every operating dollar that we spend that comes from tuition. If you round that up, just for the simplicity of doing so, round it up to 40%, and say we're going to spend $100,000 of operating money. In order to spend $100,000 of operating money, we have to come up with $40,000 in tuition and fee revenue. That's how our budget is structured. The University of Saskatchewan's dependence on tuition is closer to 22 to 23 cents on the dollar than 37 cents on the dollar.
Right. So process for budget submissions. The first call went out in November, and here's the website for details here. As you may guess, the provincial the climate is for a cut. We've been receiving zero for the past couple of years, but there is a climate for a cut. Every cut represents about $1 million. Every percentage cut represents $1 million. So, for example, we've illustrated here a 4% cut means that we have to find $4.35 million somewhere in the university budget. So times are challenging. This is going to place particular challenges for us in a variety of areas, keeping student tuition low, the extent at which we can be funding graduate students, for example, various initiatives that we have across campus. That's kind of the negative side. On the good side, it's forcing us to be quite strategic in what we do, but nonetheless, it's going to present challenges for us. The budget submission, when it does come in, we're keeping it small, keeping it very tight, concise to 2 pages as opposed to 20 pages. A lot of work for the committee to do, but best to have it fairly concise. And we've been asking for scenarios of 3 to 5% cuts from each academic unit. And of course, yes, cuts, but also we also want to hear about what possible reinvestment may occur for areas that are particularly critical. Tom, can I? There we go. 4 criteria for these cuts. Course alignment with a strategic plan. How units are doing in terms of recruitment and enrollment of students. Emphasis on productivity in academic units, in terms of productivity, scholarship, artistic work, and efficiency and effectiveness of other units. And as well, the extent to which units are moving toward hiring Indigenous faculty into the mix.
So just to pick up on that too, if you go to that document, which is again up on the budget update page, so again, main page of the university website, type in ORP in the search box, go there, look up budget, you'll see the actual full call for budget submissions. There's a lengthier list of criteria. This is a selection of criteria by which we're asking CCB, and we as a team will try to make budget decisions. There's a lengthier list of criteria than these, but these are some of the central ones in the difficult question of when you have multiple competing requests for funds in an area in which we actually expect a cut, how do we then decide what the appropriate allocations to the units are? Just some timelines for you. Next Monday, all the unit budget submissions are due in. The CCB subcommittees start the review of budget submissions on the 19th, the 23rd, and the 30th of January. Even though each of these documents is a relatively compact one, as Dave says, 2 or 3 pages, we have probably close to 30 operating units between all of the faculties, the administrative units, student affairs, libraries, and all of the other things. So it's a fair amount of reading for the committees to get through and to discuss, and then try, of course, to say, here are our recommendations for where investments should be made if we're able to make investments, and here's what we recommend in terms of cuts, if cuts should be necessary. Dean's Council will be spending a full afternoon that next Friday, a week Friday, discussing the academic budgets and the implications, too, of the 1% of the clawback. So let me just take you through this. The second forum, the second of these that we're planning, will take place on the 27th, and what we want to focus on that day for you is operations, research, ancillary, and capital budgets. We want to give you an update on what's happening with the College Avenue renewal and other major capital projects on campus so that you have an understanding of what's happening outside the operating budget. The operating budget is largely salaries, benefits, supplies, and stuff like that. These others are important aspects of university financial planning, and we want to bring you an update on those things on the 27th. We'll continue lengthy discussions with CCB and get recommendations to us as a team on priorities. And then we also need to work simultaneously on the next operations forecast, which will be due for board approval in May and into government shortly thereafter. We'll be reporting to the board on the 6th and 7th on operating and capital. We anticipate a provincial budget in late March this year. Last time, as you recall, it was delayed because of the election, and therefore we didn't have a budget allocation until end of June, early July. Went to the board for approval at the July meeting. This year we anticipate a more standard cycle, and as soon as we have our budget letter from the minister on the day the budget comes down, we'll plug that in and start doing the final calculations based on our largest single source of income, which is the provincial operating grant. We'll then have a forum right after that and talk to you about what the implications are and where we see ourselves going based on what we by then will know is our largest single number on the revenue side. Throughout April, we'll continue work on the budget and then the 18-19 forecast. The board meets in early May to review those documents and to approve those documents, and we'll have a fourth budget forum on the 9th of May. The board meets, I think, the 2nd and 3rd, and we will have a fourth and final budget forum on the 9th to give you in detail, as we did last year, where the investments and where the cuts are across campus in the form of the detailed budget letter. If you haven't seen those previously, again, they're all up on the ORP webpage. If you look under budget letters, you can go through them in great detail and see what each unit has been allocated or cut in recent years. We will do the same thing this year, and we'll take you through that at that fourth forum on the 9th of May. Now, this is a little bit of a fly in the ointment for us. As you know, back in November, when the fiscal picture of the province was clearly worsening, or it became publicly accepted that the fiscal position of the province was worsening, the government asked us for $1.66 million back. The allocation to us last year was over $100 million, and they asked for 1.66 back. One way of thinking of this doesn't actually happen, but one way of thinking of this is that given that our government grant comes into us in the form of a check, if you like, or an electronic transfer every month, our payment from government for January, February, and March this year will be just over $500,000 less than normal for those 3 months to achieve that clawback. Where's the money coming from? We had done very well with Workers' Compensation Board premiums. We had in fact overpaid because we've got a good safety record, and therefore we were getting a big refund. It's like waiting for say a tax refund, your income tax refund in the mail, and then just before you open the envelope getting the news that another big bill has come in, or the government actually wants most of it back. So $297,000 is coming from that premium refund. $275,000 is coming from preventive maintenance and renewal funds, the stuff that we use to try to maintain campus. You see, for example, some of the work that's going on in some of the hallways, on flooring and various projects like that. This was money that we had already committed, so this is a bit of a struggle for us, but we need to give that back. And we have to find $1.09 million from operating budgets across campus. Given that most operating budgets are committed to people's salary and benefits, this obviously hits discretionary spending disproportionately hard because we have obligations to employees to pay salaries and benefits. So we will be talking, in my case, with the deans and my team on the 20th about how we find $1.09 million in our operating budgets so that we are able to cope with that demand for the clawback from government. Last year, we were able to do it largely from central funds. We have exhausted that possibility, and we need now to go out to the units and find that money. Dave?
Closing up, 3 more budget fora coming up. 27th, before we hear about the budget, 27th of February, the 31st of March, once we find out what the provincial budget is, and then finally prior to the Board of Governors approval. So those are the next 3 events that we'd love you all to come out and attend. And I guess the last note is that feel free to have a view of this when you've got insomnia. And now we'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Sure, and if you do have questions, please come up to the microphone because we are taping this. We want people at the Saskatoon campus and anybody else who wishes to watch it to be able to hear what you say. If you could just come up to the microphone, introduce yourself, maybe indicate what unit you're affiliated with so that people know who you are. We'll do our best to answer the questions you have. If we don't have the answers, we will commit to get back to you with them. So the floor is open for any questions or comments that you might have about the budget and indeed the fiscal situation. A holy hush descends upon the room. While people are perhaps thinking of a question or two, it's always easy to kind of look across the fence, and I do a lot of that, just keeping an eye on what's going on at other institutions. I don't know how many of you are familiar what's happening down at the University of Montana, which is just across the border. It's our closest southern university neighbor, together with UND in Grand Forks and Minot. And the University of Montana is in a state of, they haven't defined it yet as exigency, financial exigency, but it's what they call severe financial crisis. Their enrollments have dropped dramatically in recent years because, like Saskatchewan, their population of high school leavers has diminished quite dramatically. They're stressed in terms of being able to compete with out-of-state universities on tuition. They're in quite bad shape. And a number of smaller American universities in the central north and the Midwest are experiencing these difficulties, as are small liberal arts colleges in the States. In that context, we again have been tremendously fortunate at the University of Regina to have been insulated from some of that. Given the fact that our local population is in decline until 2022, again I say because of the hard work of all kinds of people on campus in ensuring that students from out of province are coming to Regina, paying tuition, room, board, food, and so on here, and helping us balance the budget. And of course, the international students are an enormous part of that. Our international student tuition revenue now, because undergraduates pay 3 times the domestic rate, essentially full cost of their education, and the graduate students pay domestic rates plus an $1,100 graduate differential. But our total visa tuition revenue now is above $22 million a year. Without that, we would be very challenged. And to put that into perspective, our largest faculty, arts, has an operating budget in the range of $15 to $16 million a year. So that just gives you an idea of the scale in which we're operating. The international students are a key part of campus life, but clearly a key part of our financial stability, as increasingly are domestic students from out of Saskatchewan. So just offer you that.
If I could just add to that, we're members of what's called ACRU, the Alliance of Canadian Comprehensive Research Universities. And essentially what it is a group of medium and small-sized universities, kind of a non-U15. And I was at a meeting with them, actually during the last budget forum, that's where I was in Ottawa. And you know, we don't mean to talk gloom and doom, but relative to other universities across the country, we're in a much better situation than many. I don't want to lessen the concern, and we do have concerns, and we've got to be very strategic as we go forward, but a lot of other universities have been suffering a whole lot worse than we have been, so I don't know if that makes you feel any warmer on a cold day, but relatively speaking, we've been doing okay.
Again, we welcome any questions you have. Are there people in the room who are parents of university-age children? I know there are. Maybe just a show of hands. Does anybody have an experience of a son or daughter who's been approached by a competitor university, let us say Brandon, let us say Lethbridge, with offers? Has anybody had that experience yet? Because we're hearing of things like the University of Northern British Columbia up in Prince George, which is struggling for enrollments badly right now, offering all expense-paid trips to Regina High School graduates to go out and see their campus. Kind of a free recruitment trip up to Prince George. Who wouldn't take that? And come and have a look come and look us over. That's the kind of competitive environment that we never have experienced. We have not experienced in Regina until recent years. It's a changed environment. Folks, if there are no questions, we don't want to keep you unnecessarily long. We would invite you to stay in touch via the email address. Talk to any of us in the hallway. We do not claim to have all of the solutions to the issues that face us, but we are confident that working together as a campus community with the input of the Council Committee on Budget and all of the collegial fora in the faculties and the administrative units as well, that we can come through this. The university is in stable, good shape. Our enrollments, which are our lifeblood, are growing at a moderate rate, and we just want to thank you for all the work that you collectively do to support, to attract, retain, and support students to graduation. So if there are no questions, we'll say thank you very much for coming, and we look forward to your comments and to your presence at the next forum. Thanks very much.